Okay, so I want to do a demonstration for the landscape, the abstract landscape you're doing. Now, remember, this unit is focusing on color, and I know we would have gone over the PowerPoint about color. This isn't necessarily about color schemes. This is about really looking closely to find all the variations of color that you see in nature. For example, if you look at the trees right now, the bark on the trees is not brown for the most part. It's very much gray because it changes throughout the year. If you look at a tree when it's fully in foliage with the leaves, there's multiple types of green in the trees. It's not just one green. I'm looking out my window right now and I'm looking at the sky, and even though it's blue and it's a clear, beautiful day, it actually is fading down closer to like a very light white or very, 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 very light blue as it gets closer to the horizon line. Very few things are just one color. So we're going to be really making this abstract painting of the landscape that you chose, looking at the colors. So you are, once you get the grid and start. So I've got some paints. It's on a magazine. We don't have palettes. Mix it on a magazine. But notice there's like quarter sizes of paints. You don't need more than that much paint. A lot of you guys put the paint on way too thick and it should be thinned out a little bit. But secondly, a lot of you guys waste too much paint. And I know it's hard to get it. It comes out of the bottles and, big, but you can always share. You can divide the paint up into two people too. You're gonna need water, your own water, and I would suggest a couple of brush sizes. I'm going to start with a bigger brush size. So the first thing you're going to do is to divide your landscape up, whatever landscape you chose. I'm freehanding this because I don't have a ruler available right now. Please don't freehand it. So it's going to be divided into quarters. So like I said, you can be a lot. I know it's kind of hard to see because it's a black pen and some of this is dark and my lighting in my house isn't really great. So now I've got the 4 quadrants. You're going to be looking at the main color of each quadrant. So let's start looking at this one right here. Sure, there's some, this green and this yellow here, but for the most part, the quadrant is this grayish, this really kind of light gray color. This one, it's a little bit darker. There's more dark areas here. I'm looking a little bit closer. There's a little bit more blue here, so I think I might make this a little bit more blue-gray because I see more blue. And even though, so it's divided up here, so I'm not going to worry about this part because this is the majority of the square. This square has a lot of these light greens in it, and this one has a little bit more bright green in it. Just kind of what is the majority that you see. So you're going to have your paper. What do you bet that this pencil's not sharpened? It is not. Ugh. My child is looking for a sharp pencil for me. Ha! All right. So again, I'm sort of freehanding this. You're going to be a lot more precise. So, got my square mapped out. You're probably not going to draw after this one, but then they just found a ruler for me, but that's okay. So, you would use a ruler and get everything, nicely mapped out. I'll do this a little bit darker now. And again, I'm assuming yours is going to be neater because it should be neater because craftsmanship actually matters. So now I've got my 4 quadrants. I lightly drew them in. And I'm going to start mixing my color. I'm going to tilt this a little bit this way. Well, I don't know. I'll move this over here. So I'm going to mix, that first one I said was sort of a grayish. Please note, I'm not just globbing the paint on. I'm taking a little bit of paint, I'm tapping it into and it's way lighter than that. A little black goes a really long way. And if I'm looking at that paper again, there's a lot of this sort of tiny bit of yellow. So I think I'm gonna just put the tiniest bit of yellow in that gray. And then I'm gonna paint this quadrant. I'm going to keep my paint a little bit loose because you're going to be building this up a lot. So I am doing this really fast. I expect you to be a lot neater than that. So now that's my first one. Now I noticed, like I said before, that this second quadrant here has a little bit more bluish gray to it. Wipe my brush off, make sure it's nice and clean. Don't, and I've repeated this, I've said this before, don't ever leave the brushes sitting in the water, please. So now I'm gonna take a little bit of blue. I'm gonna widen the shot so you can see me mixing. I'm gonna add a little bit of blue here. A little bit more white to the paint I already mixed. A little bit more blue. A little paint goes surprisingly a long way. Okay. So now this quadrant has a slightly different gray to it. And again, it might be hard to see with the lighting that I have going on. It's not a heavy coat of paint. You're going to be building the paint up, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. I'm not going to really dry this between coats. I do expect you to do that a little bit more. All right, so the left side is mostly, it is mostly green. The right side's a little bit lighter. Actually, that's wrong. The left side is a little bit lighter, and keeping in mind, that's kind of what we want you to look for. So I'm gonna make the green, okay? Which would be 2 primary colors. Notice that I just picked primary colors. There's only primary colors on my thing here. Red, yellow, and blue. So I'm gonna make the green. I might have a scrap piece of paper to make sure my green, I'm testing my green. One problem is I'm actually using 2 different types of paint here. You're gonna stick with tempera paint. I've got tempera and acrylic on, so it's not mixing as well as it should. But I wanna make this green slightly more yellow because I think on that side it was a little bit lighter. It was a little bit, that is not good. So let's, that's better, sort of. I think I would have liked this to be a little more green. You can use the green. I would like to see your color mixing. It would be great if you just stuck with the primary colors and mixed your greens and your oranges and your purples and all of that. That would be fantastic. I'm going to go in with this blue that's not actually an acrylic blue because the yellow was acrylic, and see if I can, yeah, it's not gonna work. It's okay. So this one was a little bit darker, so now I'm gonna make it a little bit more, I'm gonna add more blue to it. And there's my first quadrant. I looked to see what the majority of the color, what the main color was. Oh my God, this is a terrible blue I'm using. The paint I'm using, I got free at like a convention or something. So, you know, not your top quality paints here. All right, so then I'm gonna let this dry. I'm gonna rinse my brush out, dry it off, put it aside. I'm gonna pull this aside. I'm gonna let this dry. It doesn't take that long to dry, okay? So don't, it's not like you're gonna do that and then you're not gonna do anything else for class. This should take you a couple classes. The next thing you're gonna do is now you're gonna divide this, you're gonna double this. So each square, let me think about that for a second. All right, so now I'm going to add second lines. You're gonna measure, so it's a lot better. So now each quadrant is gonna have 4 squares, right? So now each quadrant now has 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, you know, we've now made each square into 4. So now you're gonna look more individually at each square. So I'm gonna start, I'm gonna start down here with this one because this is a really dark green, much darker than the green that's already on there. Now, I said it's dried-ish. I'm gonna use a slightly, oh no, I'm gonna stick with the brush I had. Take my blue, Take just a little bit of yellow. It's not really mixing in well with this blue. It's okay. We got it. One of the reasons why I want you to use less paint is because you can always get more. So now this bottom quadrant is going to be this darker green, because that's what's in, that's the majority of color in that one, is the dark green. And the one on top of that, well, actually, let's go with the sky one, because now we've got, I'm going to kind of jump all over the place, and I'm not going to finish this, so you won't see. So this one on top is a little darker than the one I had. Now, you notice that I didn't draw pencil lines in that. You could do it very lightly when the paint is wet, when the paint is dry, but you don't really have to. So the next one is a lot more of this yellow-green, because half of it is this bright yellow and half of it is green. So let's, I'm gonna make this really, what do you call it, light yellow, grabbing a little bit of that green from the green that I just painted. So that's going to be there. The one on top is a little bit lighter. So out of the blue I made, I'm going to add some white to it and make it light. I'm constantly rinsing my brush off. It makes sense to clean your water periodically instead of just keep using dirty water. I generally paint with 2 things of water. I don't have that right now. The next one, I'm going to do this one. This one seems to have like a slightly little pink to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of pink, a little bit of red to the color that I just made, because it's got a little bit of pink happening. Yikes. And this side has definitely got a dark blue to it, so I'm going to need to get more blue. This is a terrible blue. So this one is going to be darker. All right, I'm not going to finish any more of this particular section just because I kind of want to move on. Because what do you think the next part is? That's right, you're going to divide. You're going to end up doing this 3 or 4 times, possibly even 5. So the next one, and in the video, I'll show the examples. I'm going to divide each square again. You're going to measure, so it's not so bad. And this one. So now I'm going to focus like on this square, because this square has got a lot of this really pale, pale, pale yellow in it. More pale than the yellow that I made. So now I am going to get a smaller brush for this. So I'm going to take the yellow, a lot of white to it. So I'm going to add a little pale yellow to this. It might be easier for you to then, what do you call it? Put another, light pencil marks. I'm not really doing that. This one's a little orangey. A little more orangey than that one. This one I actually kind of, now if I waited to this to dry, I wouldn't just add white, but I definitely want to lighten this one up because it's a little bit lighter now that we're looking more closely at each individual square. This one here definitely Has some blue tinges to that gray. It's hard, sorry, I hit this camera. And then there's that sort of pinky gray color next to it. Like I said, I didn't, it was way too pink. I'm gonna add some of that pale yellow to it because it really did. And that's the kind of things I want you to notice. I didn't put pencil lines lightly. I didn't wait till it's dry and put a little bit of pencil lines in it. I would highly suggest you do that because it gets a little more complicated when you're starting to look. If I'm looking down here, this is a really deep dark green. I'm gonna take this yellow. So this, and then the one below it has more yellow to it. And I think you see where I'm going. I'm not really gonna finish this because then it just keeps going on and on and on and on. Then I would divide the squares up again. You could actually probably even do it a 5th time. Definitely make sure that you lightly, like I said, after the pencil dries, you could lightly do this and make sure your measurements are a lot more accurate than mine are, and wait for the layers to dry before you're doing it, but I wanted to give you the demonstration. So right at the end, I'm gonna show you some other examples too, but I hope you understand what the process is. You're taking your landscape, you're dividing it up first into 4s, really looking at the main color that's in that 4. What is the majority of the color? Because as your squares get smaller and smaller, then you can really start to focus. You're going to have that background color. Sometimes it's called an underpainting. You're putting like an underpainting under each one, an underpainted color. So now as these squares get smaller and smaller, then I can really see this is a really blue-gray. This has got a slight, tiny little bit of pink, but it's more gray than pink. As I get into, as we divide these squares, this has got some really dark brown areas. This has got a lot of, if I divided this square again, then I've got a little bright yellow. An abstraction is taking something real and then taking it down to either its base shape or its base color. We're focusing on the base color. You're going to start looking closer and closer at the tiny little squares and what their colors are. You probably couldn't divide this up more than 6 times, but 5 would probably be the top if you really want to challenge yourself. Like I said, you're gonna be a lot more accurate with your measuring. You're gonna measure it, and then between the layers, you might want to very, very, very lightly. You don't want to see your pencil lines through the paint. This paint's not dry yet. You'll very lightly divide it up again so you have your squares done. And in the end, you're gonna have this kind of like a pixelated. It's not kind of. It's gonna be sort of a pixelated picture of the different colors that are in your landscape. All right. So I'm gonna add some examples at the end of this, and you'll see that in a second. Okay, so here are the examples I was talking about. This is the landscape divided into the 4 quadrants, as you can see. And looking at the main color, the color that is predominant in each quadrant. The first 2 is about the same, so that you can see it makes sense. And then you divide the paper again. You should, in 16s, both reference image and the painted paper. Remember, I didn't draw mine on the painted paper, so but you're going to do that, so yours is going to be a lot neater than mine. And then paint that second layer, looking again at the main color, at the predominant color that seems to be. You're going to have to start doing some close looking. And then you're going to repeat it again. Divide the painting up another time. And then looking closer, painting more of the imagery with just the quadrants, and then repeat it a 4th time, or you're going to divide your paper up again. You could be really ambitious and do it a 5th time. That's really going to be difficult on this size paper, but if you wanted to, I guess you could. And then you're going to go ahead and paint it again using the small grids, really looking at the smaller areas, looking at that main color, so then you end up with this pixelated image. Okay?